Well, good morning. This is take 3, my third attempt to make this video. I was sidetracked earlier in the week by news events that overtook my plan to do this Bible study, news events in Israel, concerning which I made 2 videos earlier. Then I did an entire episode on this yesterday, a 40-minute long Bible teaching that after watching, I decided, nope, trash it. It didn't meet my standard. I didn't think it was good enough. So this is my third attempt of getting back to the Bible. We were doing this teaching on the book of Ezra, which I stopped a few days before Christmas, having realized that the viewership of YouTube in general sinks dramatically over the holidays, and I figured, why make videos that nobody's going to watch? The problem is, it got me out of my discipline, and now something like a month has gone by without me making a video or adding to this library of Ezra studies. So we're getting back to the Bible. Now, in our last episode, which I had to view to remind me exactly what it was about, we traced the origins of the people who have become known in the New Testament as the Samaritans. What were their origins? We went elsewhere in the Bible to discover that these were Assyrian Gentiles that were seated or settled in the land of Israel in the vacuum created when most of the territory's Israelites were taken captive by the Assyrian Empire and settled to the east, okay, in what today would be Iraq and part of Iran. And just know that some of those people went even further eastward to become the Jews of Afghanistan and India. But what I didn't get into last week, or what I didn't include in that lesson, was that these new arrivals find themselves in a land where not everybody has been exiled. Some Israelites remain behind, particularly among the peasant class that were considered so poor that the Assyrians didn't consider them of any value to take captive back to Assyria. So some of the Israelites are left behind, and these Gentile settlers intermarry with them, forming a new ethnic group, a composite or hybrid of Israelite and Assyrian bloodlines. Okay, and this becomes a theme throughout the rest of the book of Ezra as well as Nehemiah, because Ezra at some point even commands the Jews further south in his region, okay, the area of Judah. Remember that at this point we're calling the returnees to the territory Jews, because they're primarily descendants of the tribe of Judah, with some Benjaminites sprinkled in among them. Even some of them, after returning to the country, are intermarrying with locals, either among population of Israelites left behind or Gentiles altogether. Okay, and we'll read that further on in the study of Ezra. Now, Ezra at some point commands those Jews to divorce their Gentile wives. Okay, so that too is a theme that we're going to take up in the study here of the book of Ezra and Nehemiah. Now, I also mentioned that according to the story of the origins of the Samaritans find themselves being eaten by wild animals in the countryside because they're interpreted as the local deity Yahweh not being pleased with the service of worship that they're rendering unto him. Okay, according to the ancient Near Eastern belief, each people's territory's chief deity who dwells in that territory, his powers begin and end at the frontiers of that territory, whether they be the gods of Egypt or the gods of other Gentiles or the God of Israel. Okay, according to that ancient Near East belief, the authority of the God of Israel, Yahweh, begins and ends in the territory of Israel. And he requires to be worshipped after a particular manner. And the Samaritans believe that they're being killed in the countryside because they're not rendering on the Yahweh the service that he desires. So they write back to the Assyrians and ask them to send from among the exiles priests who were taken exile. pay Israelite priests to instruct them how to worship the local deity. The problem being, as I mentioned in the last episode, was that even those Israelite priests for centuries had been backslidden and had been offering a wayward service unto Yahweh, for which they were thrown out of the land to start with. Okay, so this would be an example of what's called in the New Testament later the blind leading the blind. Okay, the blind Israelite priest being recalled to lead the blind Samaritan on how to worship the local deity. And this is why, as we're about to read in chapter 4, when the Samaritans offer to contribute to the building of the house of Yahweh in Jerusalem, Ezra and his generation, which we'll refer to as purist, okay? Purist on two counts. Purist in that they want to offer a pure worship unto Yahweh as instructed in the law of Moses, as well as a pure ethnos, okay? A pure ethnicity of the Jewish people. Ezra refers to it as the holy seed, not letting the holy seed of Israel be diminished or watered down by the admixture with others. Those two themes, racial purity, spiritual purity, are going to be developed in the next several chapters. Let's begin now with chapter 4, which I never really had a chance to get into. I spent the whole time on that digression elsewhere in the Bible into the origin story of these Samaritans, okay? But now we're going to actually get into chapter 4. Okay, so I'm going to begin now with verse 1. Now when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the returned exiles were building a temple to Yahweh, the God of Israel, they approached Zerubbabel, the heads of the fathers' houses, and said to them, "Let us build with you, for we worship your God as you do. And we have been sacrificing to him ever since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here." But Zerubbabel, Yeshua, and the rest of the heads of fathers' houses in Israel said to them, "You have nothing to do with us in building a house to our God, but we alone will build to Yahweh, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, has commanded us." Then the people of the land, that's another term for the non-Jews of the land. Okay, that when you come across that expression in these books, the people of the land, that's basically referring to the non-Jews. So the people of the land discouraged the people of Judah and made them afraid to build, and bribed counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. And in the reign of Ahasuerus, and that's the king mentioned as the reigning king in the book of Esther, okay, and we mentioned a couple episodes ago that Esther takes place around this time when a Jewish state has been reborn and the majority of the Jews of the diaspora, both in that day as well as our day, have chosen not to return to that reborn Jewish state. Why? Because life has become comfortable in the diaspora. Just as it is today for American Jews, it's far more comfortable and easy for American Jews than it is for their Israeli brethren, okay, who, while I'm teaching this study, are fighting for their very existence, okay, fighting another war for their existence in the Middle East, something that the Jews of the diaspora have no experience with. Okay, so just as in Esther's day, so it is in our day that the majority of the world's Jews have decided, well, oh, you tell us there's a reborn Jewish state? Oh, that's nice. We wish them well. But as for us, we plan to remain here in the diaspora. Okay, so the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, they wrote an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. In the days of Artaxerxes, Bishlam, Mithridath, and Tabeel, and the rest of their associates wrote to Artaxerxes, king of Persia. The letter was written in Aramaic and translated. Rehum, the commander, and Shimshai the scribe wrote a letter against Jerusalem to Artaxerxes the king as follows. Rehum, the commander, Shimshai the scribe, and the rest of their associates, the judges, the governors, the officials, the Persians, the men of Erech, the Babylonians, the men of Susa, that is, the Elamites, and the rest of the nations whom the great and noble Osnappar deported and settled in the cities of Samaria in the rest of the province beyond the river. Now, that's an important expression. The importance of that expression far exceeds what you would think just reading over that as we read this chapter. The province beyond the river, okay? The word in Hebrew, ivri, which would then become translated through various languages to ultimately become the word in English, Hebrew, okay? Ivri becomes the word Hebrew. It means from beyond the river. What river? The Euphrates River. If you look at a map of the landmass of the Middle East, the Euphrates River, as it descends southward from its origins in the Caucasus Mountains near Armenia, it cuts through Syria and Iraq as it continues its way to its exit in the Persian Gulf. That river divides the Middle East to the west and east of it. To the west are the modern day countries of Israel, Syria, or let's say parts of Syria, because the river flows through Syria itself, parts of Syria, Lebanon, Jordan. And on the other side of the Euphrates, what is largely Iraq, and beyond Iraq, Iran. And the inhabitants on either side of the river Euphrates refer to those on the other side as those beyond the river. In other words, the Euphrates becoming that point of reference, that great geological and geographical divide that splits the Middle East into two. Now, Abraham is referred to as Abraham the Hebrew, again coming from the word Ivri, which meant Abraham from the other side of the Euphrates. Abraham, the foreigner to Canaan, because he's from beyond the Euphrates, from what today is the Iraq, what we call Iraq. That name would follow Abraham's descendants down to their sojourn as slaves in Egypt, where the Egyptians referred to them, at least in the book of Exodus, as the Hebrews. So here, this term that people just gloss over, okay, the province beyond the river, is an important concept in the ancient Near East. So important that it follows Abraham and his descendants for hundreds of years until they're known as the Israelites afterwards, or the Jews even after that. Okay, the Hebrews, being one of the oldest expressions or terms for the Jewish people, is derived from this expression, the area beyond the river. What river? The river Euphrates. Okay, getting back to the reading here. Deported and settled in the cities of Samaria and the rest of the province beyond the river. This is a copy of the letter that they sent to Artaxerxes the king. Your servants, the men of the province beyond the river, send greeting, and now be it known to the king that the Jews who came up from you to us have gone to Jerusalem. They are rebuilding that rebellious and wicked city. They are finishing the walls and repairing the foundations. Now be known to the king that if the city is rebuilt and the walls finished, they will not pay tribute, custom, or toll. Now, that's insinuated by the city building walls. A city builds walls in order to defend itself either from robbers and brigands in the countryside or to defend itself against an expected invasion. So when the Jews of Ezra's generation decide to rebuild the walls around the city, that's being interpreted by the locals here as defiance of their Persian overlords. In other words, why are these Jews building walls if not planning to rebel? After all, why do they need walls? Walls are meant to keep out invaders, but not just invaders as in the Persians, but also the countryside's invaders, okay, marauding tribes of Bedouin and robbers and people who could come into the city at night and rob. Okay, here in the Middle East and what's called the Fertile Crescent, there's always been this tension between those settled in cities and villages versus those who are tent-dwelling nomads, otherwise known as Bedouin. Now, the Bedouin, lacking a material culture of their own, being, for the most part, dwellers of the bleak desert, where all they have is the wool from their sheep and their goats, but not much more than that. Maybe they have some clay that they're able to derive from the countryside to make clay pottery and stuff. But the Bedouin in ancient times, up until our very day, are known to be marauders because they lack material goods in the countryside where they live, in the wilderness, in the desert, and therefore they are known to come into the cities and into the villages to steal. Okay, and therefore in the ancient Middle East they always would build walls around villages and cities in order to keep these marauders out. But these walls also have the double application or secondary application, to the extent that they're built wide enough, tall enough, and strong enough to keep out an invading empire. Now, it's likely here that Ezra and Nehemiah and Zerubbabel built the walls of Jerusalem for the former reason, to keep out the marauders and thieves. But the very existence of those walls have now given fuel to slander and libel, to slander the Jews to the imperial power that be, this being Persia in those days, to slander them and say, look, these Jews are no good. They're planning something nefarious. They're planning to rebel against you, and therefore come and put an end to this Zionist project. Okay, now I chose that term Zionist project because that's what modern day Israel's enemies refer to Israel as. Some of them refuse to even utter the name Israel. Okay, they'll instead opt to say the Zionist entity. That's what Iran's leaders call Israel. That's what Hezbollah's leaders call Israel. Now, I said at the outset when we began the study of Ezra that one of the reasons why I've chosen this book and this group of books that we're going to read through over the next few months is because there's many parallels between the time that these books were written and tell of and this current time. This book, Ezra, as well as Nehemiah and Zechariah, tell the time of the return from the first captivity of the Jewish people. What was that first captivity? In Babylon. It lasted for 50 years. I got into that whole issue, 50 versus 70, the 70 years being from the destruction of one temple to the rebuilding of a second temple. And a whole episode was dedicated to that. And you can go back into the library and look for it. And today's Israel exists after a second captivity, much longer captivity, a captivity that lasted for almost 2,000 years. And similarly, today's reborn Jewish state is slandered before the governing bodies of the world. Okay, now for those of you that have been following the news for the last couple of weeks, South Africa brought charges of genocide against Israel to the International Court of Justice at The Hague in the Netherlands. Now, nobody who's an honest observer of Israel's war against Hamas could accuse Israel of genocide. Between you and I, if Israel wanted to commit genocide against the Palestinians, it could do it in a nanosecond, literally a nanosecond. And when I say nanosecond, that's a reference to an atomic reaction. Everybody knows that Israel has the tools and the weapons that if it wanted to, it could destroy the Palestinians, destroy the Iranians, destroy the Lebanese and Hezbollah and all of its enemies in a nanosecond. It's an interesting topic, but a topic that I won't get too deep into in this particular episode, but maybe at another time we will. Okay, Israel's alleged, and I say that with a tongue in cheek because we all know that Israel has an arsenal of nuclear weapons. It's been suggested that Israel has an arsenal of over 200, something between 200 and 400 nuclear warheads, and the ballistic missiles that deliver them anywhere on the planet. So we all know that if Israel wanted to commit genocide, it could. Is it? No, of course not. Is there been a large occurrence of collateral damage in the Gaza Strip as a result of Israel waging war against an enemy deeply entrenched in civilian areas and using civilians as human shields? Of course there is. but these are unintended consequences of a war that was launched against Israel, imposed against Israel on October 7th. Israel has a right to defend itself, as any country would, among those in that hypocritical assembly of nations called the United Nations. But nonetheless, Israel is accused of genocide and has been accused since its recreation in 1948 over and over again, slandered and libeled. And therefore, in essence, the Jews of yesterday, as well as the Jews of today, are on trial before the nations for no other reason than the nations being against the sovereign decree of the sovereign God of the universe, Yahweh, to restore his people to the land of Israel at the time of his choosing, which has been a very unpopular decision among a watching world and will continue to become more and more and more the burden that it was predicted to be in Zechariah chapter 12, which we're going to get to when we read the book of Zechariah, when the issue of Jerusalem and the territory of Judah in particular, it says in Zechariah chapter 12, it's referring to both Jerusalem and Judah as a stumbling block to the world. And at that time, all the nations will gather against it to destroy it. But God promises that it will become a stone that crushes all the nations that come with that purpose in mind. And I can't wait to get to that book, Zechariah, especially those last few chapters that refer to that final end time intervention, direct intervention of Yahweh, the God of Israel, on behalf of his people. But we have that yet ahead of us. We'll just get back here to Ezra to bring this study to a close. Okay, I was on verse 13, and now it be known to the king that if the city is rebuilt and the walls finished, they will not pay tribute, custom, or toll, and the royal revenue will be impaired. Now, because we eat the salt of the palace, and it is not fitting for us to witness the king's dishonor, therefore we send and inform the king, in order that search may be made in the book of the records of your fathers, and there you will find in the book of the records and learn that this city is a rebellious city, hurtful to kings and provinces, and that sedition was stirred up in it from of old. That is why the city was laid waste. We make known to the king that if the city is rebuilt and its walls finished, you will have no possession in the province beyond the river. Okay, so Israel's cause just being slandered to the lords that be. Now, this is interesting. I won't make too much of it now, but maybe speak of it in later episodes. Many people are currently whispering in the ear of President Biden, it's not in your interest, Joe Biden, to continue to support Israel in this existential war for its survival. For the young people are not with you. The college kids are not with you. It's not in your interest, Joe Biden, to continue strong like you started strong when you supported Israel at the beginning of the war and you sent an armada of ships to back up its cause and to warn as a deterrence to Iran and Hezbollah not to get involved. And you called yourself a Zionist and even declared yourself a Zionist twice, being the first president to ever do so. You came and visited Israel in wartime. But Joe Biden, we, your closest advisors who are responsible for getting you reelected next year, are telling you, and they tell him consistently, that if you continue to show that support in Israel's cause, you won't get reelected. It's not in your interest. So just like these people are whispering in the ear of the king of Persia, well, it's not in your interest to continue to be a benefactor of these rebellious Jews. Okay, the Jews being slandered as rebellious and seditious here. Likewise, today's emperor, if you will, for America is the most powerful country in the world, and its president is de facto the emperor, and the emperor is having whispered in his ear, it's not in your interest to side with these seditious, troublemaking, land-greedy Jews. Okay, and of course I'm adding the slanderous charges. They're not mine, but that's what's being said by Generation Z, and that's what's being said by all the pro-Palestinian college students and the hundreds of thousands that come out every Saturday to protest and scream jihadist, annihilationist slogans about Israel on the London bridges in England and in Manhattan, almost weekly in Manhattan. Protests which turned violent, and Biden's advisors, who have their hand on the pulse of the crowds there in Manhattan and on the college campuses and elsewhere, are telling him, hey, Joe, it's not in your interest to continue to support Israel. Now, why am I bringing this up? Because I read an article today in which Joe Biden made a phone call a week ago to Benjamin Netanyahu and told him, I hear you're telling your people in Israel that it will take up to a year to defeat Hamas. Well, I'm telling you, you don't have a year. I can't support you in an election year for the duration of this war if you say it's going to last for a year. And now we have the interest of Joe Biden pitted against the interest of Israel's very survival. And I jokingly posted to my Facebook page today, gee, with that type of stark choice, I wonder what choice I'll make on election day. That's no choice at all. It's obvious who I'm going to choose. I'm going to choose to side with those who side with this existential war that Israel's fighting. Not just because I'm a Jew, but because I believe in my heart of hearts that this is God's own doing. He's the one who's regathered us, the Jewish people, back to this land. It is part of his sovereign will for the times that we live in. And anyone who opposes that is not just opposing us, the Jewish people. They're opposing the very will of Yahweh, the God of the Bible. And if you take the Bible seriously, as I do, and I know that most of you do, well, the choice, therefore, is simple. You can either side with what God's doing or side with those arrayed against what God is doing. I choose to side with those who side with what God is doing. Okay, moving on. Verse 17 here. The king sent an answer to Rehum the commander and Shimshai the scribe and the rest of their associates who live in Samaria and in the rest of the province beyond the river, greeting. And now the letter that you sent me has been plainly read before me, and I made a decree, and search has been made, and it has been found that this city from of old has risen against kings, and that rebellion and sedition have been made in it. And mighty kings have been over Jerusalem, who ruled over the whole province beyond the river, to whom tribute, custom, and toll were paid. Therefore, make a decree that those men be made to cease, and that this city be not rebuilt until a decree is made by me. And take care not to be slack in this matter. Why should damage grow to the hurt of the king? Then, when the copy of King Artaxerxes' letter was read before Rehum and Shimshai, the scribe and their associates, they went in haste to the Jews at Jerusalem, and by force and power made them cease. Then the work on the house of God that is in Jerusalem stopped, and it ceased until the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. And I could see these people running in glee and, feeling victorious and running to the Jews and telling them, stop this Zionist project, stop. But I'm going to end this study today with just the first few verses of chapter 5. I'll do the whole chapter in the next study, but it's important to end this study on a positive note. So, starting here in chapter 5. Now the prophets Haggai, Zechariah, that's Zechariah, the son of Iddo, prophesied to the Jews who were in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of the God of Israel who was over them. Then Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Yeshua, the son of Jehozadak, arose and began to rebuild the house of God that is in Jerusalem. And the prophets of God were with them, supporting them. And why did I choose to end today's episode with those first couple verses in chapter 5? It's to remind you that ultimately the sovereign will of God wins. both in the affairs of nations and in the affairs of individuals. Israel shall be rebuilt. I'm not just referring now to what we'll see in the rest of the book here. Modern day Israel will continue to be rebuilt. It will continue to be settled, and it will continue to fulfill the destiny that God has sovereignly chosen for in accordance with his everlasting accords or covenant with the Jewish people. And you may ask me, well, Steve, what's that have to do with me? Well, I got good news for you. If you're a faithful, true believer, if you're one of God's children, guess what? His sovereign will for your life cannot be overthrown by his enemies or your enemies. And if your enemies are your enemies because of your faith or the stand you take for your faith, well, I got news for you. They're not your enemies alone. They're God's enemies. And a sovereign God's will for your life will not and cannot be overthrown. For ultimately, he and his will be fulfilled and victorious in your life. And that's why I wanted to end this episode with these first couple verses of chapter 5. Well, I hope you go away somewhat encouraged, and I thank you for being with me. Today is Sunday, for sharing part of your day with me, and I wish you the rest of the weekend be blessed, as well as the rest of your week, and I'll see you soon on another episode, either with an Israel update or as we continue to plod along in the study of this book of Ezra. Until then, shalom.